Tenemos un evento muy especial que corresponde a los eventos para el inicio del Congreso Internacional de Bioética que tendremos a partir del miércoles. En este momento, el workshop que se va a llevar a cabo, este taller, está en relación con la American Universities Organization, en donde tenemos aquí a su principal representante, el cual en conjunto vamos a estar desarrollando estas actividades de este taller de bioética. Antes de empezar, me gustaría que hiciéramos una breve presentación de cada uno de ustedes para que el doctor Macer tuviera mejor conocimiento de ustedes. ¿Sí? Empezamos.
Bueno, soy Raúl Garza, soy el presidente del Instituto de Investigaciones en Bioética y soy el director de Misión y Ética Organizacional del grupo Prescriptive.
Soy Ana Carlota Cantusalina, yo soy neurólogo pediatra, trabajo con la coordinación del programa de posgrado de neurología pediátrica en el Hospital Universitario y hice la maestría en bioética y estoy haciendo el doctorado. Margarita Fuentes, estudiante de doctorado en bioética. Odontólogo. Margarita.
Soy Cristina Sierra Saavedra, soy odontóloga, realicé la maestría en Ciencias de Salud Pública y estoy en el segundo semestre del doctorado de bioética.
Mi nombre es Diana Salmán, doctor. Yo soy licenciada y estudié la maestría en Administración de Empresas y estuve estudiando el doctorado en bioética también, y ahorita doy clases de ética en un diplomado.
Mi nombre es Efraín Montes, de la Universidad de Nuevo León, viejo alumno del Instituto de Bioética. Actualmente ocupo un área en un centro de investigación que tiene que ver con la bioética y la bioseguridad.
Francisco Treviño, cirujano.
Juan Eugenio, médico familiar, pasante de bioética.
Rubí Nieto, médico con especialidad en biología clínica y apenas estoy empezando el doctorado en bioética.
Hello, good morning. My name is Ramesh Kanal. I'm from Nepal and I'm studying in American University of Southern Nations in Arizona since last year, and I'm one of the student of Professor Darryl Macer, and I'm studying masters in bioethics and global public health. I'm also running a club in Nepal called Youth UNESCO Club, which is now in 5 countries, and we have more than 3,000 members in and out of the country. So thank you very much.
Buenos días, soy César Sofía, soy investigador en bioética y estoy estudiando el doctorado y también trabajando en el Instituto de Investigación en Bioética. Es mucho.
Okay. Bueno, yo soy Marta Marcela Rodríguez, soy médico dermatólogo con maestría y doctorado en bioética y en este momento me voy a permitir presentar al doctor Darryl Macer. El doctor Darryl Macer es doctor en filosofía en la Universidad de Cambridge, es rector de la Universidad Americana de las Naciones Soberanas, fundador y director del Instituto Bioethics en Japón, Nueva Zelanda y Tailandia, y es profesor afiliado de la Universidad de las Naciones Unidas de UNESCO. Es ex asesor regional de la UNESCO para Asia y el Pacífico y es profesor visitante de Plagiarism. Entonces, empezamos con su presentación.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, Minister. Thank you. Thank you, Enric, for helping a translation. I know some of you speak fluent English even better than I do, I think. And if you need a translation, please ask Henrik. So I also want to just explain before we continue. Could you please mute your microphone on Skype? Thank you. So we have several of our students from around the world on Skype with us, and more will join. As this lecture also, they can get credit for our Masters in Bioethics. We've started 1 year ago this week to try and make a global Masters in Bioethics program. And we have 4 days a week the group Skype conference around the world on bioethics. And today we have colleagues from 4 countries. Olumide is from Nigeria, Randy is from India, Dalmer is from Nepal but in the US. We'll get many coming from Bangladesh soon, many doctors who study bioethics and from other countries. So sometimes I'll switch screen just to check if I'm connected. Okay. And maybe there'll be a chance for them to say, would you like to say hello, anybody, to the group here? Could you speak and say hello?
Hello everybody there.
Introduce yourself.
Okay, I am Riddhi. I'm from India basically. I have my PhD in bioethics. It was on pandemic influence of planning and management in the Indian context. And now, okay, I want to pursue my career more further in bioethics. So I am doing this course with the Master of Global Bioethics and Public Health in AUSN. It's a okay. So this is all about me and this course.
Thank you, Riddhi. Olumide, do you want to speak as well? You can. You just joined. This is his message is here. Dalma, do you want to say anything? Okay, and then so what I do is we add these people to the list depending from where they are. We have a group chat on Skype. And then so through the session. So I do this every 4 days a week. Sometimes usually lecture for 8 hours. So when I don't stop, just remind me when it's lunchtime. No, we must sell very well, and we have I think, interesting interactive program as well. Okay. And Joba, do you want to say hello? Joba, could you introduce yourself?
Hello everyone.
Explain who you are. Could you introduce what you're doing, Joba?
Hello everyone. This is Zubair Alom. I did already my honors and LLM from Dhaka University, the highest echelon of academic excellence in Bangladesh. And I also joined in my department, my alma mater, as a lecturer. So currently I'm serving as a lecturer at the Department of Law, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. And I'm also a student of AUSN, Master at this class, Master in Bioethics and Global Public Health. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, Joba. Okay, so he's a faculty of law. Okay, so I will follow through the PowerPoint, which I've and I think this morning we're going to try to look at how to write papers or thesis, some guidelines, and I know some of you are doing a doctoral program in bioethics, so you will need to write a thesis. I don't know, have anybody, are you writing your thesis or still studying lectures?
¿Alguien está escribiendo sus trabajos?
Good. And also we often write the papers for publication as academics. And this is very important to try to broaden the understanding of bioethics around the world. So I will talk first about the scope of your research. Descriptive bioethics, to introduce the field of descriptive bioethics, because many people will do the research in bioethics and it's a new field. So what sort of subjects do we do research in? I will show some examples of papers in bioethics. I will talk about what to do and what not to do. And then we'll have a break, and then I'll talk about review and publication. Okay? I'm just going to, excuse me, maybe I'll just share the screen to our friends on Skype. Since when the number is less than 10 or 12, we can share the screen. So that's what we do. Okay. So, do you know who this person is? What's his name?
Albert Einstein.
Albert Einstein. So, according to Einstein rules for publishing a paper. 1, collect lots of data. 2, find correlations and make nice graphs. And 3, publish a paper. It's so easy. Yeah? So maybe you can think of some equation as well, like E equals mc squared, and then you'll have a very good paper. Okay. So is writing paper so easy?
No.
Which part is the difficult part? Collecting lots of data? Introduction. Everything. Finding correlations. Nice graphs. Publishing is, of course, writing the paper is important here. He says publish a paper, but before you publish, you need to write. So, what is bioethics? What do you think it is? Do we learn what bioethics is by the papers we read? Does that define what bioethics is to us? Do we learn it by thinking? Do we learn it from love? What do we learn bioethics from? Could you please tell me?
I don't know, maybe living, I mean, with experience in life, you can find the real meaning of bioethics.
From living?
For living, yes.
From happy living or sad living?
Both, I
Both?
think.
We can learn from both, yeah? Sometimes when we're happy, we can learn something, but when we have a sad or crisis, we can learn even more. Okay. Good.
I would say life experience on a day-by-day basis, but very importantly, I think that what you get at your very early years, family values, those things will make a strong substance how to go ahead your life. But it's a lifetime experience. That's what you get. Particularly bioethics.
Okay, so lifetime experience, family values, growing up. Okay. Yes.
Pass to theory to practice.
So the challenge of applying theory to practice is also a good lesson. Any other? Dr. Gaza, Professor Gaza, why did you get interested in bioethics?
Well, you have to live alone, and perhaps what you need to get acquainted of is your attitude toward life and toward love to each other.
Bioethics is a still of the life. We can introduce in all the areas in science and our personal lives. Introduce our conduct in the action, not only ethical actions, but bioethical action, including the reflection and across the values and principles.
Okay, thank you. Siyoshi, where does your bioethics come from?
My bioethics
Yes.
theory
What is bioethics to you?
means continuous learning, process of learning, process of interaction and discussion among people from different backgrounds and different for me, bioethics is related to life, freedom, respect for life of all the people who are in this world. And I often use the term, instead of using the love, I like to use compassion, because in my culture, in my country, compassion is considered high value that all the people should share. So compassionate act of learning process through love, compassion. That's how I see bioethics.
Okay, compassionate, thank you. Any other comments? Ramesh?
In my opinion, bioethics is a way that we can solve the dilemmas that are found in science and in environment, and bioethics is an insurance for our future life. And without bioethics, I think it's really difficult to survive in today's context, because this world has been transformed from different wars and different issues, climate change, and now I think bioethics will be considered as one of the good subject for every youth to study and at least to have general knowledge.
Any other comments?
I think, like Doctor says, the world changed, the science are changed, but in this change, the values are static. And we try to point everyone, take everyone, and says this new world, this new form, type of view, points of view of everybody in the world, this take a light of the ethics for all the species, for not kill our species, for these new worlds in science studies and changes or divisions of gender or race, etc.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Carlota. Margarita?
Voy a responder en español porque no soy muy fluida. Yo creo que es un estilo de vida la bioética.
Vas a hablar y yo se lo traduzco después.
Que es un estilo de vida que se va adoptando poco a poco
desde el término, vaya, porque empezamos a pensar como ética y ya posteriormente lo adaptamos como bioética, pero que se aplica a todos los ámbitos de la vida.
Okay. She said that it's a style of life that you are going to start adapting ethics and become bioethics at the end. And then you said, can you repeat again? Que lo puedes decir también, la última,
que puede aplicar en todos los ámbitos
and you
de la
can
vida.
apply in everything.
Okay, thank you.
Yo pienso que la bioética en sí, la idea es trascender, llegar más allá en cuanto a todo el ámbito de, puede ser en cuanto a salud, psicología, todas las ramas, en cuanto a enfocarse no nada más al ser humano, también al medio ambiente, a los animales, y en sí, pues, ver más allá y ver qué pasa con los dilemas éticos y cómo podemos ayudar a tantas cosas que han surgido con la tecnología. Y en sí, pues, a mí me agrada mucho porque como estudié salud pública, uno ve la comunidad de una manera y dice, bueno, ahora sí, ¿cómo la vas a solucionar? O sea, los problemas éticos.
Okay, and she said that dijiste muchas cosas, es difícil cuando necesito, la dinámica va a decir, dices una parte y yo después se la traduzco a esa parte porque si dicen muchas cosas entonces me pierdo un poco. ¿Me puedes repetir lo de nuevo, por favor, nada más para empezar?
Trascender en muchas áreas.
Ok,
el cómo a través de la tecnología y de la ciencia surgen los dilemas éticos y cómo se van a solucionar.
Thank you. Biosafety?
Well, since bioethics is something created by men not a long time ago, I'm interested in bioethics because it's not exactly like philosophical issue. It's one science issue created by people with science about some kind of behavior with the other people. And I'm interested in bioethics because in this time, when we live on time from technology time, I think we are leaving behind the social bioethics. Because bioethics is one behavior with the other people, not only with the human people. I'm talking about the human life, even plants, animals, and now the weather. And I think we need to take care about that. It's not bioethics exactly for some kind of disease. It's for behavior of the man.
Okay.
That's the reason I'm here.
Thank you. Rowena?
En español.
Okay.
Bueno, entré a estudiar es importante, como dijo la compañera, para la vida diaria podemos conocer diferentes campos de la vida del mismo tema. No significa que uno esté bien o esté mal, simplemente.
So it's more gray sometimes, in the middle. And we have some comments from our friend on Skype. Johannes from Taiwan. Shahannes is from Bangladesh too. And we had introductions from our friends. We already have a little globe in this room. Okay, so thank you, Rob, for getting the password. It's already infected. So let's go back to so we have different images of bioethics. We may learn bioethics through our family, as you mentioned. We may apply it to everything, life, our trees, our ecosystem, our pets, our family, our parents, our children, our professional colleagues, our patients, our video camera experts. I want to ask, in a sense, well, I want you to think about, I will talk later, I think we'll talk about what area of your research, because if I want to publish a paper on bioethics, it may be difficult to publish a paper on everything. These are really more like a book. If you want to write a book of your own philosophy of bioethics, then please write a book. Much of what you said is suitable for writing a book. For writing papers, we have to often choose a very specific topic of your research. So bioethics is a bridge between different cultures of science and philosophy, different peoples, patients or client, teachers and students. It's not always clear. Sometimes it's hazy. So in my book, Bioethics is a Love of Life, in 1998, I published a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge on a clear blue day. It was very clear to see the other side. In the new version, which is on either iTunes, or I can give you a copy, it's an interactive book. Bioethics is on a more normal San Francisco morning, foggy. Do you have fog in Monterey?
Yes.
Do you have fog in Bioethics? Sometimes.
Many times.
Many times. So, but we can see the other side. So we can see there's a red space for communication. The word bioethics is first used in a paper by a German Protestant pastor in 1927. His paper was called The Bioethical Responsibilities of Human Beings to Plants and Animals. And he wrote 7 papers in 1927 and 28 using the term bioethics. So that's a very interesting. In English, it was sort of rediscovered by Van Potter in 1970, and then in America, a lot of discussion of bioethics since then. But the first papers, academic papers, 7 papers, well, actually 8 papers in German in 1927 to 1928 on bioethics. Then we lose the word for 40 years, and it comes back. So now his papers have been retranslated into English and publicized by the work of Professor Hans-Martin Sass, who's a famous German bioethicist. And it's very interesting because actually his view is very holistic. It's the bioethics responsibilities of human beings to plants and animals. Very advanced in his thinking. Many of us are still trying to get our responsibilities to ourselves together, or to others, human beings. So let's talk about prescriptive bioethics, second part. Descriptive bioethics is the way people view life, their moral interactions and responsibilities with living organisms in their life. So I have my bioethic and you have your bioethic, and I asked you to tell me something about your bioethic this morning. It's on video camera already. In fact, I don't know, it's trying to make us think. So, from many reflections, we could say ethics is a concept of balancing benefits and risks of choices and decisions. The underlying heritage of ethics can be seen in all cultures, religions, and in ancient writings from around the world. Some trends in applied ethics are regional, but most are related to some aspects of globalization, the expansion of respect for human rights, and a shift towards individualism away from communitarian ways of approaching ethics. This is a picture from Thailand. I lived for 9 years in Thailand, and have a peace park. If you like trees, come and do some weeding in the peace park. In the name of peace, we try to discuss bioethics. So, balancing ideals, doing good versus not doing harm, individual autonomy, justice to all. You sometimes hear the words beneficence, doing good, non-maleficence, not doing harm, autonomy, and justice. Now, this formulation of a common bioethics is very popular in because of certain textbook. Do you know the authors of this textbook? 4 Principles of Biomedical Ethics. Beecham and Childress, yes. And in fact, in March, I was with Tom Beecham for almost a week. We missed Marcella, she couldn't come. But we had in Chile. And very important, the idea of his principles are that all 4 are important. No principle is above another. And a very common misconception of their principles is that autonomy is most important. It's not. All 4 principles are equally important as foundational principles, and they can be balanced. And you can find these principles. Are they foundational principles, the fundamental ones, from which you can derive everything else? In fact, in some countries we say there are other foundational principles in addition to these, like harmony, for me, love is, but it can include these. We can find expressions, you can find these principles of a long heritage in biology, medicine, society, and religion. So new technology has been a catalyst for re-examination of medical ethics and social ethics and international dialogue on ethical principles. So bioethics then is expressed in different fields of professional ethics. Medical ethics, dental ethics, environmental ethics, public health ethics, applied ethics, ethics of biotechnology, for example. So whether you're a surgeon, surgical ethics, biosafety ethics, ethics of end of life, ethics of the beginning of life. There are many areas, but gradually we become more specialized, and if you're going to publish a paper or do research, you need to look at a more specialized area of bioethics. There are now, globally I estimate there are around 4,000 papers on bioethics published. In this expanding, there's a lot of papers. So there's a lot of papers in almost every subject. The second way to view ethics is prescriptive ethics, is to tell others what's ethically good or bad, or what principles are most important in making such decisions. It may also be to say that something or someone has rights, and others have duties to them. And this is related to law and policy making. When we look at cross-cultural ethics, which is a type of ethics I'm most familiar now in developing, it's perhaps arrogant for someone to tell you this is right and that's wrong, or this is how you should think. You should think according to 4 principles, or 7 principles, or 1 principle, or you should think in my way. In fact, we can learn so much from different ways of thinking. But we need prescriptive bioethics at times, but it can also be very contradictory. So, for example, if I do a human embryo experiment in Germany, I may go to jail, prison. If I do a good experiment in England, I might get a Nobel Prize. So, but it's the same morality, the same difficult issue. And prescriptive ethics sometimes sets strange laws which you go from one state to another, it's completely different. And you are, I think, familiar with this, with the bioethical tourism between different countries, Mexico and the United States, Canada. Germans may come because they can't do something in their country. Japanese may come because they can't do something. You can do different things.
This problem, the difference ethics, is a big problem to publishing papers, no? Because you need uniform for the knowledge of our papers, to make to all of them universally this knowledge. I think when we are trying to write a paper with this, in Mexico, this is our moral or our bioethics, but not the same in other parts. This trouble, this thing, where do you suggest about it?
Yeah, so the question, it's a very good question, Carlota. Should I be careful of my paper's argument when I'm publishing in a bioethics journal because it may be against the law? This depends on the journal. Some journals want to have a legal reform and publish different articles, and many bioethics journals will do this. They want to publish. But if you publish in some society journal or the association has a standard, or let's say it's a Catholic journal or an Islamic journal, if the editor is very strict, they may not want you to propose something which is contrary to the prescription that somebody said. But most academic bioethics journals will publish articles which question. Natural science journals also sometimes have the same thing. If you challenge evolution, maybe it will be difficult to publish in some biological journal. Okay? If you challenge the state particular orthodox view of a science problem. The same in a surgery. If you publish some radical new technique, many medical journals will want to see if it's true, and some will publish, but others may say, no, he's a quack, we don't want to publish that, it's unusual. So sometimes you need to think. The good journals will, bioethics, want to have dialogue. And we'll talk about different types later. So let's go to some examples of papers. I want to show you an example of several types of paper briefly, and I'm going to do this by I had some papers here which I had it ready yesterday. I hope you'll find this. These are some things I wanted to show later. I'm going to go through different agreements you need to do to publish paper. Let me look at this. So, this is an example of a paper as a commentary. So commentaries are some types of paper. This is one I wrote on ethical conditions for transnational gestational surrogacy in Asia. Surrogate mothers, do you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. Surrogate mother, so... So I will have a baby for you because you cannot have it. So sometimes the commentaries, and this is a paper which in fact was published as an editorial in the American Journal of Bioethics. Later I can show you the published paper, but this is the draft version. And they deliberately have a paper and then they publish like 8 or 9 commentaries on the paper. And each commentary, they're happy for people to take very radical or controversial position to make it an interesting discussion. Commentaries are sometimes interesting. American Journal of Bioethics calls for open commentaries on the website, and that's usually 2 or 3 page paper, and you could say, well, surrogacy in Mexico, or why we have a right to surrogacy, or we don't have a right. So this one I talked about surrogacy in India, Thailand, and Japan. I looked at tourism and trade, and I took a rather positive view of the right of people to have surrogacy and international trade, which is deliberately controversial because I wanted to encourage debate and try to think, well, provision of goods and service between people of different ethnicities, economic conditions and cultures is one of the facts of modern life. In any relationship, there's a risk of exploitation and constant claims of exploitation between the richer and poorer countries of the world. Does that prohibit trade or exchange between people and countries of different economic means? If it does, then we are arguably never end that divide. And what humans have called trade over millennia will come to a halt. So you can see, when applying trade to commercial surrogacy, where you have imbalance between the rich and the poor, can we use international trade and the colonization example for a modern example of surrogacy? So it's maybe controversial. Yeah? So it creates an interesting discussion. That's why, in fact, they thought it was quite interesting, and it was the paper in that issue. But I then talked about the Indian example, the Thai example, Thailand, and in fact, in the last few months, Thailand made a law to prohibit international surrogacy because of, I don't know if you know a famous case, Australian couple got a Thai surrogate mother, and they had twins, and one of the twins had Down syndrome, and one was without Down syndrome. The Australian couple asked the Thai surrogate mother, please have a selective abortion and abort the Down syndrome child and just keep the child without Down syndrome, the two fetus. The Thai mother said this is against her religion, and when the Australian couple went to Thailand, they took their one child without Down syndrome and left the baby with Down syndrome in Thailand. We don't want it. So the Thai surrogate mother keeps the Down syndrome child, but the Thai surrogate mother is very poor, and this was very shocking. Most Australians and most people in the world think it was unethical. What do you think? Unethical Australian couple. They had and actually the Thai surrogate mother, the screening test for Down syndrome was done at about 4 months. They did not tell the surrogate mother until 7 months the result. And but still probably she would have kept the both fetus. But the Australian couple, you know, everyone thought such a shocking discrimination of their child not to take the second fetus as their genetic child. But actually it helped encourage Thailand to develop a law. So it's prohibited in Thailand to do the international surrogacy. The only case is if a foreigner is married for more than 6 months to a Thai husband or wife. So mixed marriage for more than 6 months, you can do the surrogacy to try and stop a marriage of convenience for a surrogate mother. But there's another famous case, a Japanese man in Thailand who has more than 20 children born to surrogate mothers from his sperm. And but he is a very rich man, and he loves Thailand, and he wanted to populate with Japanese Thai children. You're not doing this in Mexico, are you? No. Good. That's good. So he's still single. You're still single, yeah? Yes. I haven't got married yet in Mexico. Very eligible man. But Korea. So we can find these examples, and so how do we deal? But can we stop individual rights? So this talks about a paper you can see in the process of writing. You see, I show, well, I remember there's a reference. In fact, the XXX is the paper that I'm commentating on. I didn't know the author because it's a blind commentary. The reviewer, we have a paper, and then we give a comment, and then I was referring to this paper on different aspects. And then I added some references. In this commentary style, I have a limited number of references. The journal tells what I can do. Okay. So that's one example, short commentary. So if you're not used to writing, this can be a good way. Well, let's say I'm a busy professor, but I find it very interesting. And it doesn't need to have much. You don't need to have the research. You can just do the literature research and make some comments based on your experience. Original article. Original article will have something like this. As Einstein said, you will collect so you will collect lots of data, as Einstein says, make nice graphs. Okay. And nice graphs, and that can be bioethics as well, descriptive bioethics. So we have some examples of those type of papers. So this is actually let me do this. So policy and attitudes towards collection of personal DNA in genetic databases in Japan. So this paper it has an abstract. Okay, this is published in Journal of International Biotechnology Law. It has some numbers which suggest I've done what Einstein said and have some data. Genetic databases. It introduces what is genetic database. Okay. It gives the background. So you can see an introduction here. So the Human Genome Project, concurrently with this Genome Project to science, then we go on to ethics. There's paragraphs about AUSN issues, ethical, legal issues, and numerous privacy implications. So we have 2-paragraph introduction, one on science, one on ethics. Each paragraph is a topic. Next, public understanding regarding genetic research and AUSN issues. I introduced, for example, a mail response survey was conducted. It's previously published to talk about the sample error, for example. I talk about the number, comments from respondents. Then we go on to ordering discussion. Well, often when you discuss survey results, you could go by your order of your questionnaire. The first question was on youth attitudes towards life. Next was on what challenges do you have, for example. Here I have from the open comments I've categorized, so I have in some examples of open comments to explain the categorization method to people. So you can include a few examples in the published paper. In your thesis, you have an appendix with all the comments. Okay. And I have some graph. It's not too bad. It's not very beautiful, but yes, no, and DN is don't know. There needs to be an abbreviation here, which somehow is not. It's probably in the text, not applicable. So Japanese, and this was in color, but this is black and white. So unfortunately in the black and white print, you can't see the color coding. But in this sort of scale, the type of comments, it's usually left to right, so we have some order. More example comments. This is showing some categorization of the type of feelings. Then it's about the attitudes in Japan, so I talk about evolution of a regulatory situation in Japan. And in these attitudes towards anonymity in genetic research for temporary, permanent, or non-specified time periods for storage of their genetic data. So this was important for the human genetic data collection. And in variation projects, discussion. In the discussion section, we talk about the results of our research. same as in the natural science paper, and we challenge the interpretation of the paper. We look at other papers and try to see about what's significant. We also look at alternative ways to interpret our own data. And I'll come back to this in the review process. Reviewers want to see, did you present both sides of how one set of data could be presented, and then some references. So that's another example of a paper. Original article. So a commentary, original article, and another type of paper, a review paper. Okay, so review papers tend to review a subject. So this is, for example, this is a research on technoethics, a paper on education of ethics of science and technology across cultures. So in this paper, the purpose in this collection of papers in a book is to review the subject, and so I'm reviewing education of the subject. So it will be not so much original data, but looking at the situation so that people can understand it. So I will describe, for example, global calls for ethics education, goals of ethics education, looking at different ways to assess ethics education. Although, for example, implications of this, bioethical maturity. How do I look at the goals bioethics education that, in fact, I talked about some of these when I came last time, and I developed further when I worked for UNESCO. And empowering educators, participation, evaluation. And so we have these different, it's like a review and a lot of papers to give people access to some more literature on ethics education. So they have a few pages of papers and a sort of a review. So those are three types of paper for your, in some of your case, for publishing a thesis for graduating. For example, in your doctoral program, any doctoral students here, and some master students, you will probably be required to publish a paper. Is that correct? You cannot graduate unless you publish a paper. So it's quite serious. The same in our master's program, you must publish the paper. So the research needs to be publishable. So this is the idea that our research should be something useful. And it probably makes you a better writer having to do that.
¿El artículo de revisión tiene algún parámetro de subtemas?
Sí, ¿qué pasó? Sí.
Yeah, so I'll talk about different parameters, some examples. But you have to follow, I'll go through this now. So we're going to do what to do. Okay? So let's look at what to do. Okay. And we're getting more friends joined to our Skype colleagues. Can you hear me, by the way, our colleagues here in Bangladesh? Johanna said the sound is breaking. Can others hear?
You can hear very clear.
Okay, thank you, Arif. Good. So Arif and Shamima are Shamima is the General Secretary of the Bangladesh Bioethics Society. We have a group here from in Monterey, and we are having a bilingual discussion. And then our colleagues will join some time. Let's go on to, so what to do, what not to do. Both of these are important. Okay. So I've got the next some design questions. So know what your reviewer is looking for. So that's the first thing. For example, should the references be in APA citation style, as was required by Professor Marcella for us in writing a paper for the conference coming? You said follow APA style. Sometimes the journals have a different style of reference citation. How many sources do they permit? Are there sources that are unacceptable? For example, can I include some articles from my newspaper? Can I include personal communication from Professor Garza? He told me this, so I write personal communication. Is there some journal which is accepted or not accepted? Can I include the publication from a master's thesis? Generally we should be able to, but we don't often see this. Okay? Check grammar. It's basic design. So ask someone else to read the paper and mark unclear words and grammar. Your writing may be clear to you, but difficult to understand for others. What's more, have them go over punctuation and grammar. As well, you may have read it so many times, you've stopped noticing. So when you're writing a paper, and you start writing, and after many days, I finished, yay, let's send it to the journal. It's best to ask somebody to read it, just to check the English or Spanish, or whatever language you're writing in it, Japanese, even more difficult. Okay. So it's good to have somebody to check. Some people are very good at writing perfectly. But they're generally people who write quickly make mistakes. I'm more like this type of person. So I will sometimes have a very simple mistake because I like to write very quickly, busy, and I don't want to spend a long time. Check content errors. So take a break, go back and read it another day or next week to check. So you may have made a mistake in the content. Did you actually mean, all your positive sentences are read to be positive? Did you miss out any negative words? Like, are you correctly citing somebody else's paper? If a colleague reads it, they probably need to be an expert in the area to give you advice on the content. So, for example, you're writing your doctoral thesis, you will get a friend to read if the grammar is correct. But your supervisor or advisor or professor will read the content. But before the professor reads it, they probably would like the grammar to be correct. Okay? Because just doing the grammar check is not always easy. But we tend to have to do that too. Next it says, use transitions. Show the logical connections between your ideas. Transitions make it clear that one paragraph flows into another. What's more, your topic sentences should ease into the evidence effortlessly in the first place. So we use these type of words. So, you know, comparatively, likewise, coupled with, in addition, and light of. So when you're going from one idea to another idea, a transition is useful. Because in your mind, you understand your logic, but nobody else does. Okay. So this is why we have a connecting sentence. The same in Spanish, the same in English, the same in Japanese, the same in Nepalese, the same in Bengali. It's the same. So another point, write in the third person present tense. The majority of papers should be written in the present day third person. That means you never use the word I. So you have to write, like some people write, the researcher conducted a survey of 200 nurses. Instead of saying, I conducted a survey of 200 nurses. When we're giving an oral presentation, we would probably use the word I or we conducted the survey. So many journals will not want you to write the personal pronoun. Is it the same in Spanish? No? Do not summarize unless it's a review paper. What does that mean? It means when I go to the... Nowadays, so many people write their paper not by thinking, but by using internet. The best news for writing a paper is no internet. You are stuck in the room for a week with some journals and books and your mind, and you need to write. That is the best. It's bad nowadays. I remember when I was teaching in Japan, my son came to Japan many years ago, and I had a lot of graduate students. And the internet at that time sometimes collapsed for a couple of days in the 1990s. I think we have our colleagues in Bangladesh, internet collapses, and electricity collapses, which makes it difficult as well for writing. But let's say internet is down, and all my students said, I can't do anything, there's no internet. Have you said that? Sometimes? The internet's down, I can't do anything. This is the perfect opportunity to write a paper and to write your thesis. No Facebook. Who's on Facebook right now? Sorry, internet, please just check. Bad luck. We knew you'd be on. Internet's working with our friends here in Skype. So, in your own words, it's very important. So the temptation is you go to a paper, I search a paper, I summarize it or I copy it. The next one says do not plagiarize. If you're quoting, use quotation marks. Do you know what plagiarize is?
No, we don't know.
What is it in Spanish?
Plagiar.
Okay. This is so common. Okay. So, how do you check if somebody plagiarized something? Do you know? There's software to do. But let me show you the simplest way to check.
Copy paste.
Yeah. So you know. Okay, I can't open. Anyway, I have this. So I copy it. Bioethics is. It's already telling me some sentences which appear here. So let's make sense. Bioethics is the love of life. If somebody wrote that without a quotation, I can find who said it. I didn't. I can find these references. I can find these articles. All these articles, it seems like this person is writing very much about bioethics' love of life. Okay.
That is why it's so important to collect data.
Yeah.
To read a lot about what you're going to write. Because if you write something that you have not read before, you think that nobody has written.
Yeah.
But in fact, it has been written.
It's been written. So that's interesting. So I can find, for example, this one, go back later and somebody is quoting, but the others are all from the papers. So when students or writers, and some of these are mentioning different software, Turnitin software, in fact, Siyoshi's colleague from Erasmus, is here. Siyoshi's in the room. Siyoshi, say hello. Hello. Okay. And Arif is there too. Arif from Taiwan. Yes, your friends. So nice to speak. I'm keeping control of Siyoshi here. Okay, Marcella's under control. Correct? So, plagiarize. So it's so easy to check. You don't even need to spend expensive software. What happens if you plagiarize a student paper in an American university? What's the punishment? Do you know? Expulsion. You plagiarize one paper for one class, you are expelled from university. Oh, I spent $50,000. Too bad, you're expelled. So they learn not to plagiarize. If you copy, you need to put a quotation mark. I want to tell you an interesting story from one of our professors. This professor is called Professor Jastav Rai, who's a Indian colleague of mine who's a doctor, working in England, but he was born in Tanzania. He's Indian, a Sikh, and then in Tanzania, the British schools followed the more modern and creative idea that you need to write in high school your answers to exams in your own words. Okay? And this is 40 years ago. He then went for a few years to live in India. And the high school teachers, when he wrote in his own words the answer to these senior high school questions, he didn't get any more A's, he was getting more like B's. And he asked the teachers, why? And they said, you have to copy exactly the textbook answer. That's what we want. Textbook answer. And so a different education style. So then, and this is common in many countries. So then when they come to writing papers, if you're trained in the system, you will get used to writing, copying papers. And this is, if I'm writing about bioethics, I don't want to ask people what your definition of bioethics is. I use one textbook and they'll say this is bioethics. And they write this and then they get caught for plagiarizing. So depending on your culture, you need to think, but it's very important nowadays. You need to think about your target audience. Okay? So what's the target audience? So let's go. If I'm writing in a journal of biology, I expect biologists. If I'm writing in a philosopher's journal, I write for philosophers. If I write in a newspaper, I'm writing for the public. So let's look at the next paper, next slide. How do I make the outline? Ramesh said the most difficult thing of writing a paper is the introduction. Well, brainstorm about the paper outline. As you do your research, what questions do you ask? What patterns are you noticing? What are your own reactions and observations? So you make an outline. Do you make an outline when you write a paper? Who does? Yes? Who does not? Who's writing a doctoral thesis without an outline? Oh dear. First thing you need is the advisor to give you comments on your outline. Chapters, subsections. So there's no big surprises later. After 5 years, no, don't accept that. Bye-bye. So yeah, it's a big investment of time. And outlines help you plan. Okay. Sometimes an outline, each section can relate to a question you ask. Okay, so like I showed you about the Human Genome Project and ethics. So what's the Human Genome Project? Paragraph. When did I start? When did it start? What did Japan do about it? What about AUSN issues? When did AUSN issues start? All these then become paragraphs, questions, logic. I'm doing interviews, okay, about a certain subject. Each subject, I can ask questions. You write an outline, you give it to either yourself, or if you are a student, then you give it to your professor to check. And they will hopefully go through several drafts of the outline and then develop the logic of this. The word thesis, I don't know what the word in Spanish, I think it may mean the same, but a thesis is also like a statement of a hypothesis or an idea that you have. In Spanish, what do you use? It's the same. Okay. So you're meant to have an idea when you write a thesis. Okay? A string that ties the paper all together. A good thesis will succinctly express the main idea of your paper in 1 or 2 sentences. It should also mention all the points made in your paper, explain the significance of your argument, be logically sound, appear at the end of the introduction or introductory paragraph. In the case of a doctoral thesis, you'll be writing a long introduction, and the last few paragraphs of the introduction always explain the outline of your thesis overall. This is a standard thesis construction mode. But the same for a smaller paper. The end of the introduction explains to the reader what you're doing. So, for example, I have a thesis, Bioethics is Love of Life. So, how do I explain that? Write a book about it, each chapter on different aspect, then come back again in the conclusion to say if it's which part's right or wrong and how to interpret. So, brainstorm. Do you have a word for this in Spanish? Do you use the same word when your brain is confused, or is it different?
The translation would be like a brain of ideas.
Sorry?
Brain of ideas.
Brain of ideas,
yeah.
Okay. Okay, not reign of confusion. Sometimes students have a brainstorm because they're really confused. But this is a type of storming of ideas. You brainstorm? So, next page, let's look at if your research involves human subjects or data from them, get the results of, get the research approval. So data from them means you using data from a previous research on human subjects that's been published or not published. Just check you have approval, especially in not published studies. So let's say we did a survey 20 years ago on called International Bioethics Survey. I did. I have 6,000 replies from 10 countries. I had an introduction sentence. Did I get signed consent? Did I get the approval of an institutional review board? No and no. Did I preserve the privacy of people? Yes. Okay. So, 20 years ago, it was not required in Japan to get approval for such social science surveys of people. It's anonymous. Can I use the data? Yes, I can. I don't need new IRB approval. But if I'm doing the same study today, I need approval. Okay. So, for example, if anyone's young, Ramesh has a form to do on attitudes of young people up to age 24, approximately. He's now older than 24, so he's no longer youth. He's old. Then, so we needed to get a consent form. We needed to follow, in fact, a consent form. I will show you an example of this from our institutional review board in our university. Let me show Ramesh's form. Okay. So this is a form we use to get consent for the survey. In the United States, there are laws, and so we have a 44-point checklist of consent documents to check, and everything needs to be numbered. Okay? So, and if we were going to do the study in Mexico, probably we need the approval of Mexico too. But let's see what we're going to do. Informed consent obtained from the subject, yes. We have choice yes, no, or not applicable. Obtained from the subject's legally authorized representative. Yes, we do, because, and these are where the numbers in the informed consent document we write onto the informed consent form to see where they correspond. So, number 2, because it's surveys of youth, we have a statement, if you're under 18 years of age, your parent or guardian must sign this form agreeing to your participation in all the statements in this form, in addition to your signed agreement. So you sign here, and your parent or guardian here. And then we have this sort of survey introduction. These different points are highlighted. These refer to the points in the checklist. Okay? So the checklist goes on. It has to have a statement indicating research. Research has to be mentioned in the consent form for a research study. Has to have a purpose, procedures, experimental procedures, expected duration of subject participation. Okay, well this is a survey. So So in this case, it seems, well, it's going to take 15 minutes. But if it's a clinical trial, of course, it needs to say how long. And so some of you are doing medical research, so you'd need to disclose alternative procedures. In this case, it's not applicable because it's a survey of attitudes. Okay. So we have these, sometimes people will waive the informed consent request. Sometimes informed consent is obtained orally only. Waiver of informed consent. Can you think of an example where you would waive the informed consent requirement? I saw. Can you hear?
I don't understand the
So,
waiver.
A waiver means I can do the research, but I don't need to get informed consent for it.
Maybe an observation study.
Well, observation study we main request we don't need because we're just observing from a distance.
Maybe a review
or for a review we probably don't need the whole process. We don't need this. It's only if we're doing in person. We drove into the hospital, we went past the emergency department. If I'm doing a research on emergency surgery, on emergency medicine when we have unconscious patients who can't get consent, and the paradigm is you will treat with the benefit of the doubt first. If I want to do an innovation on different procedures for emergency room, I'm going to need to get consent for the process, but I can't get informed consent from unconscious patients. The same maybe if I'm doing research on people with Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes we can get from their guardian or surrogate in that case. But if it's an emergency case, you may not have anyone to get consent, but you need to do it immediately. So that's an example. So these are the types of consent forms. Do the research. So how do I do the research? Utilize the library, journals, internet, books, and various academic databases to find solid primary and secondary sources. What is a primary source? A primary source?
Observation.
Yeah, it could be direct observation or a paper.
Books. Other books or...
It could be a book of a philosopher who wrote the idea, a poetry that the poet wrote, a paper which describes the results of a study, and a secondary source. Secondary source. A review article, let's say. A review article, or let's say I'm trying to read about the Aztec philosophy. Mainly I have to use secondary sources unless I understand the language and go to the temple and can read the inscriptions or read the ancient manuscript. So if we're using an investigation for different languages, we may have to use secondary source as well.
When it's a research in basic research,
yeah.
It pass to the clinical research, is normally is primary, is basic.
Well, it depends on the type of data. I can get a philosophical paper can be done in primary. In primary is we have the original writing. The original data is presented. Now, when I'm writing a thesis or paper, primary sources are best. Okay. Secondary sources might be a textbook of bioethics, which introduces different ideas, encyclopedia of bioethics, But I should go back to the original article if I can get them. Take notes, including detailed references for citation in this and future papers. Write down what points come from where. Find information a second time can be like finding a needle in a haystack. Do you have that expression in Spanish? Finding a needle in a haystack? Yeah. So, did you ever go to you read an interesting article and you wrote some note, but when you come to write the paper, you can't remember all the detail, or you forgot to write down the page number, or I can't read my writing. Okay. You do this sometimes? So it's very important to keep good notes. I brought my old diary with me. Usually I keep notes in my diary of the year. And so my diary, the only reason I have my diary is basically to keep notes. But so I can usually keep notes. I don't always remember where my diary is, but I have notes. So detailed notes are better because I'm researching for this paper. But next year, I may want to write another paper. And so if I have my notes organized, it's going to really help me. So in my career, it's going to help me that I have a note. So on my computer, I keep notes to conferences. So in the conference time, you'll see me making notes on my computer. Why do I do that? With the search engine, I can find my notes from 25 years ago. I will have notes from the conference 12 years ago here on my computer. So I may be able to remember what we talked about. So keeping that note, same going to a library. Nowadays, we have a telephone, the iPhone. What do we do when we go to the library nowadays? We photograph the entire book. I don't need to pay a copying fee in a library where it's sometimes expensive or awkward, or I have to fill in the copyright form. I'm naughty. I take the photograph, and then I have the photograph fills up my computer with memory, and then if I can, I will print out these photographs if I want a hard copy, and then, or I'll put on my external drive. But the camera makes research so easy. But you always have to have a photo of the cover page, the sources, and then the pages that are interesting with a page number. So you make sure your photograph includes all these elements. So the iPhone, or whatever phone you have, is a revolution in research methodology. Most libraries allow you to take the telephone. And in fact, some archives that I go to, you may not be allowed a pen. Sometimes you're allowed a pencil, sometimes not. If it's old documents, you may only be allowed camera. So that you don't spoil the manuscript. So when you make an outline, this will organize your thoughts and be the skeleton of your points. Organize your outline to address the introduction, the body, and conclusion. Bring in the reader and state your thesis in the introduction. Support your reasoning in the body, wrap it off at the end. You check that the flow of your initial analysis fits your outline, and if not, you edit either. So you have an outline, you start writing. Sometimes you have to revise your outline. It's okay. If you're doing your thesis, you agreed with your professor or advisor on an outline. You start writing your thesis, and you think it makes more sense to me to add new sections or to change. Chapter 2 should now become chapter 4. This chapter 3 should be into 2 chapters. You just explain, make the logic, and then in the process you probably confirm to your advisor saying, I'm in the middle of writing, I've decided to make chapter 3 into 2 chapters, and by moving a section around, and you explain the logic. Outline is like that. It provides a framework. Develop your introduction. In the first paragraph, you get readers' attention and make your thesis by the end of the introduction. Make it interesting. Start with a relevant quotation, intriguing question, or by addressing the counter-argument. If somebody's going to read your paper, you have to make an interesting first paragraph, otherwise they're not going to read anything more. When I was learning, I did my first doctorate in biology, first thing of reading biology papers quickly is look at the figures and graphs. Abstract, figures and graphs, conclusion. Sometimes then I go to the methods to see exactly how they did the experiment. In bioethics papers, sometimes they have no pictures. Boring. No graphs, no pictures, no photographs, just philosophy. Okay? So you need to have a very logical structure, otherwise people will go to sleep. Many years ago, when I wrote my book, Bioethics is Love of Life, my Japanese graduate student at the time was bilingual, who made a translation of that book. She started translating and then she always said, it's really good to start reading this at night. Within 2 pages I'm asleep. So instead of counting sheep, she could read the book on bioethics. Anyway, she did translate it, which is good. But hopefully it became a bit more interesting. So build the body. Structure subsections according to your outline. Make sure each point is logically sound and adds weight to your thesis. A topic sentence, generally the first sentence, but not always, should clearly state what this point is. And follow up your assertions with multiple sources. Follow the same format for each subsection in each paragraph. Okay, so the body is the main part. You have subsections, as it shows you. Each should be in a logical order. Discussion, discuss the weaknesses of the research and how you address them. Cite references with contrary conclusions to your own. And end with a strong conclusion. Bring your paper to a close. Restate what you've already mentioned in the opening statement and leave the reader feeling satisfied. When you read a paper, do you feel satisfied or sometimes with papers? Or bored? Or you give up? What happens when you read bioethics papers? Mixture? What's a good paper to you?
For me, okay, I just wrote one paper, and it was negotiation and bioethics, and it was for an educational magazine. And well, I felt very good because the purpose of that article is to let them know, I mean to let the people know how the bioethical could be relevant for all topics. And I felt good because I think the goal was reached.
Yep. You achieved your goal. And what did other people say? Did they enjoy your paper? Did they tell you?
Yes, they told me that. That's why I felt good.
Okay. We have our colleagues from online on Skype. Does anyone want to make a paper? We can read your writing, including ha ha ha. Okay. But taking notes is important. Do you want to make any comments, our friends on Skype? No?
The paper that I made would be the one that is the school. And what I want to read, what I like to read, that is one criteria. And the other is that if the paper is written logically or not. If I see that this is not logical, if the ingredients of the paper are not set logically, then it will not, I don't think that paper is worthwhile reading. So that's how I choose.
Okay, so you choose a paper, Ackman, because it's logical. Okay?
Yes, logically written. If the things that are written in it convince me that what the author is saying is believable, or it is written logically, or it could be convincing in some manner.
Okay, thank you, Ackman. By the way, Ackman, I think you've met Marcella when she came to the conference in Scuba. Ackman was in Scuba at that time, a long time ago. I'm using the PowerPoint that I sent by email this morning, Maru. Check your email. And Johanna said that she's in Taiwan. She said, a good paper for me is to provide a new perspective or viewpoint. A good paper is to provide the answer to the question I'm trying to find the answer to. If you can find the answer, that's wonderful. So, it's important that readers are satisfied with what you write. So again, it depends on the audience. If you're writing a paper for a particular audience, you need to address it to that audience. So some do nots on this slide. Do not plagiarize. Again, say that. This is the most common issue. And my attitude to plagiarism is to try to help people to learn how to quote, because many people don't know how to write themselves, they've not been taught. And different cultures have different traditions for measuring success, and students are rewarded for giving a textbook answer. Okay, so that's why, and a memorization aspect of examination systems also tends to lead to that. Do not invent results. Some people invent results, and we're going to look at some famous examples soon. Be yourself and not someone else. In bioethics, I think that's very critical. So be yourself, do not be your professor, do not be who you think will be published. You must be yourself. Do not be boring. You will not be remembered. One of the advice I got from earlier mentors of mine was, if you're going to write a paper, say something outlandish, say something different, and then you'll be remembered. If it's what you think, of course you don't create nonsense. You're trying to create something. So if you're writing about negotiation and bioethics, then you say some points which people will remember as a key message. So do not be boring. Okay? Sometimes this will make you unpopular. For example, bioethics is love of life. Some people love the idea, and some people hate the idea. But at least people know that was a different idea. Okay? Do not forget to acknowledge everyone. When you write a paper, do not forget all the people who helped you. There are two ways to acknowledge people. One is a co-authorship, okay? As a co-author. if you wrote a paper together with somebody, then you should both be authors. If you wrote the paper together with many people, then you're going to be for many co-authors. You also have acknowledgements at the end of a paper to say, I acknowledge Carlotta and Marcella for reading my paper and giving me comments. I acknowledge the reviewers for making this paper more, better. I acknowledge my mother for giving me pie. We don't usually say that. Okay. But in the book we can. Okay. Okay. So in your book you can write, but in an academic paper, usually people giving you food. But however, if you got a grant, you need to acknowledge a grant. I acknowledge grant number 1112 from the National Institutes of Health, which provided the funding for this. I acknowledge the use of the laboratories of the Institute of Investigation of Bioethics, where I could conduct my research for 3 months, and the facilities provided to me. So that's one thing we can do. So authorship is a source of ending friendships. If you are not included as an author, sometimes people will end a friendship. But having too many authors can be a problem. I'd like to show you. Okay. So let me show you a paper. This is a paper that I am an author on. I'm an author on this paper, a number of papers in the journal Nature. A habitat map of the human genome, International HapMap Consortium. And if I go to the authors at the end of the paper, you will find a list of authors. Here they are. Now, it's 2 pages of authors. This was a large genetics program. I don't know if you've heard of the HapMap, but it's a basic reference on the genome. So I was under this, listed under community engagement, public consultation, and sample collection. So I have the Bioethics Institute, Darryl Macer, my doctoral student, Eiko Isuda. So Eiko and I collected the consent and collected the blood from this Japanese population for this genome project, habitat map project. We had a lot of community meetings, and so we're authors here, along with another few hundred people. But this was decided at the beginning of a project. This is a global project, hundreds of millions of dollars funding. People will be co-authors on papers. So it's nice. But then other papers, we may have just 1 or 2 authors. So for example, this one I have was actually a paper I need to get published for one of my doctoral students, Eiko, on the same sort of thing. So for her graduation, so we both wrote the paper, used results from the work. She needed a paper as a first author, and so probably I wrote more of the English, she did more of some of the study, and then the community engagement, and so that's sort of balancing authorship. This is another paper. This is a review paper we published in Nature Biotechnology some years ago with another one of my students. In this case, I'm first author because I wrote, I guess, most of the paper, and she didn't especially need the paper to be first author. And the surveys, we did the surveys across Japan, and it was interesting to ask scientists. This may be interesting for the biotechnologists. What images do you come to mind when respondents think about biotechnology or genetic engineering? So I'd done a survey in 1997 in Japan with this question. Marianne and I did the survey on scientists and public, and these are the types of keywords that came up in the comments. What was biotechnology? Benefits and risks only mentioned specifically by 9% of scientists, but 9% of the public here and only 3% at 1997. So ethics was only mentioned 2% there, but 9% here. So possibly the people answering this question had been a bit more aware of ethics discussion. Was it against nature? So these are open comments, so people write anything can I categorize and look at the reasons. And then attitudes towards products originating from GMOs. So in this case, I had done surveys. I used to do a lot of prescriptive bioethics. So 1991, 1993, 2000, and then I've done scientists in over 10 years. It's time to do another one. I'm trying to, but nobody is to do. And then we can approve of different uses of genetic modification. So it has some data. Approve, disapprove, making tomatoes with better taste. Approve, disapprove. Actually, the scientists and the public are very similar. Large sports fish scientists and the public are identical. And interesting thing of this type of survey from the comments, this found that about some bioethics issues involving applications of science and enhancement. The scientists in Japan and the public were very similar. So this was an interesting question. When we went to some other questions, we might find difference. But in order to understand the society and the social structures, attitude surveys were useful. So that's why it was kind of interesting. And in attitudes towards cross-species gene transfers and some conclusions. Okay. So that was a paper. Now, it was an original article, but because it's in the Nature journals, it has to be very short. So the full details are in another paper, that is presenting still original details that might be of interest for people to read in the mainstream, because it has a big circulation. So again, in the choice of article in the 1990s, I was trying to publish some articles, short but sweet, in journals like Nature, which I knew would be read by everyone. Every scientist would read Nature at that time. So a bioethics journal, you can have a long paper, but it's only read by 5 people. Nowadays, fortunately, more than that. And nowadays, with the internet search and Google, you can find many people will search for keywords and find articles that they wouldn't otherwise have found, which is good. But back 20 years ago, people only read from journals. So if you wanted your ideas to be known, you had to publish in journals, mass distribution, which meant different style. Okay. What type of papers do you like to read? So, what type of papers do you read? Interesting papers? Reviews? Original articles? Commentaries? Papers with a different view? Is See, so it was what I said. If you want your paper to do something, say something different. So if you want to be remembered, say something different. Because that's what you like to read. I don't want to read the same thing all the time. In fact, I won't read it. If I find papers reading the same, I'm not going to get to the end of it. I don't need to. I know the ideas already. So if something wants to say something very interesting, I will read. Do we, no, I just, do we want to have a break?
Yes.
Would you like to have a break? 5-minute break? 5 minutes, okay? And if you want to bring some drinks, bring it back. So 5-minute break?
Thank you.
Okay, and if anybody, if you want to talk to our friends from around the world, you can come into my computer and talk to them. Okay, so we'll have a 5-minute break, and if you have any questions, this guy, please send to me, but I'll leave this guy to next week. So I have sent the file to Professor Rao to you. So you can download the read of it. Right now, the next part of my Okay, so we've got a growing number. We have some more seats. Oh, it's okay.
My name is Pedro.
Hello, Pedro.
Janet.
Janet.
Ortiz.
Okay, welcome. Nice to meet you. And by the way, if you would like the PowerPoint, of course, we'll give you the PowerPoint that I've gone through. I don't know if you're putting all the PowerPoints together or that you're welcome to have a PowerPoint. And somebody asked me for a copy of the paper. That's welcome too. So I'm up to the slide called, it's slide number 26, Code of Conduct in Science and Engineering. Now, we just started to talk about things which you should not do when writing papers, and it also relates to when you're doing science and ethics research as well. So, some basic values. If we look at codes of conduct that countries or associations have said are our code of ethics of doing research, there are some common themes we can see in these codes. The basic values of science may be included, like science is important for the human mind to be creative, the freedom of expression, science should respect human dignity, these sorts of statements you can find. Pursuit of knowledge shifting to the pursuit of wisdom. What that means is, in the past, science was the pursuit of knowledge. So a Cartesian saying, I think, therefore I am. I do science because I want to understand the world. The pursuit of wisdom is I want to do something useful for the world. I want to not just understand my joint, how my joint works. I want to help people who have a broken joint. I will have rheumatoid arthritis, I want to help them. So, wisdom. Mainstreaming ethics education. Ethics education was included in a lot of science saying, well, we should teach people science ethics, how to write papers and do research ethically. Professional responsibility. As a scientist, I have some professional responsibility. As a surgeon, I have some responsibility. Okay? As a teacher, I have some responsibility. Scientific responsibility is specific for the scientific area, and we will talk about some examples of abuses which will be clear of what the problem was. Also issues on the design, the conduct, usage of science and research. So let me go to the next slide. Results of review of codes of professional behavior, international standards for ethics and responsibility, core traits or virtues that are found in codes of ethics related to individual behavior. So in looking at codes of ethics across the world, some core traits they found. Honesty, truthfulness, respect, openness, accuracy, collaboration, fairness, conscientiousness, loyalty. Okay, so you all do this, don't you? Yes? Are you all honest? Are you honest?
Yes.
You may not hear that on Skype. We had an interesting comment. In the morning, yes, and in the afternoon, not so much. Okay. So
he's a morning person.
All day is morning.
Okay, so is honesty always a good policy? Okay. Okay, so Marcella, Professor Marcella, she's been falsely accused of being a terrorist. The armed police squad have come to the hospital with their machine guns. Marcella is hiding in our office, trying to clarify what's happening. The policeman comes to your office door and says, "Have you seen Marcella?" with the gun. What do you say? Who says no? I haven't seen her. You say no? Who says yes, she's here in my office? You have to choose no or yes. You can't be hesitant, otherwise they're going to come and shoot her. So what do you say? No. She, yes, I saw her in the taxi going to the other building. Okay. You tell a lie. Now you're a terrorist too. Okay. Depends. Immanuel Kant did this famous exercise. He said, even if he knew his friend was going to be taken by killed by the bad person coming to the house, he can't lie and say he hasn't seen. But for some of us, there are exceptions for honesty. We would say, no, I haven't seen her. And we'd, of course, try to help her clear her name.
Who is more honest? Marcella or the terrorist?
Or the policeman.
Or the policeman?
Yes. Marcella. So, loyalty, consciousness. So, these are some issues. So, when you're telling the results, for example, I want to tell you, I showed you a paper, haplotype map paper, the haplotype mapping project. We took the samples from 100, in the repository there are 100 Japanese samples. We have never disclosed where we took the samples. And it's part of the agreement of the HapMap project, so these people will never be stigmatized. There'll be no disclosure of which places we took the samples from. So we are not open in this case. We are protecting confidentiality because these people, their cell lines are immortalized in a Corel repository. Their DNA is immortalized. We don't want them to be linked. So that was an agreement where you have an exception saying, well, to protect confidentiality, of our group. Another thing about my project which is interesting is we actually took more samples than we needed. And then we randomly chose some samples to go to make cell line. So even the people who get blood don't know if their blood is in the cell line. The only way is to do a genome sequence of themselves and compare. So this was a way to provide a lot of privacy protection for this, because it was going to be a global resource for certain countries' genomes. But in general, these are examples we find of codes of conduct. So I'm going to look about what reviewers look for. So this was, in a sense, the second part of the talk. Read the guides for reviewers for different journals or conference or the grant you're applying to. So if you are writing a paper for a journal, some seats up here, the best way before you submit the paper is, if they have a guideline for the reviewer, read the guideline, because the reviewer has been told to look at the paper for this. And that's a great way to guide your writing, because your reviewer has to agree, so you get the reviewer's guide. Some of them are openly available. And of course, if you're reviewing for some journals, you'll be used to that. But read carefully the instructions on the website. We review papers for the following issues. You have to follow, otherwise you can't expect to get published. Some statements. The Universal Declaration on the Human Genome and Human Rights, 1997, Article D13, the responsibilities inherent in the activities of researchers, including meticulousness, caution, intellectual honesty, and integrity in carrying out their research, as well as in the presentation and utilization of their findings, should be the subject of particular attention in the framework of research on the human genome, because of its ethical and social implications. Public and private science and policy makers also have particular responsibilities in this respect. Okay, so here we have some issues accepted by the international community of what scientists should be. Meticulous. What does that mean in Spanish? It's the same. Caution. Caution. Intellectual honesty. Integrity. That integrity is a very big concept. So in carrying out the research, as well as the presentation and utilization. So in doing the research in the first place, in presenting it in a paper, and then utilizing it. Let's say we use it for policy or for new clinical practice. An example of responsibility. The action of scientific research is founded on the ethical principle of beneficence. There are professional responsibilities inherent in the activities of research, as we mentioned, meticulousness, caution, intellectual honesty, and integrity. Any conflict of interest must be disclosed in publications and to funding agencies. What is a conflict of interest?
You have some relationship with the sponsors or with the aim of the protocol or the research.
That's right. Financial, Shemima mentioned, or issues of linkage to the funders. Okay, so we should all use the iPhone for taking photographs in the library. Oh, thank you, Mr. Apple, for giving me money to promote iPhone. I wish they'd give me a free iPhone. But anyway, I think it's a good thing. Okay, but unfortunately I'm not sponsored by Apple, even though I use Apple, but I wish I was. But never mind. Google just got accused in Europe of Google Shopping always appearing #1 on the Google search engine in Europe. This is not good. This is a conflict of interest for a neutral search engine. Okay. Why do they want Google Shopping to appear #1 on the search? Because they get money. And we use Google for nothing. You always have Google searches, don't you? The top of every Google search, sponsored Google searches. That indicates these are sponsored sites. Yeah? They have a conflict of interest, they declare it. Conflicts of interest are a very big issue in medical research, pharmaceuticals. Honesty and integrity, next slide. Any suspected deviation from these standards, especially alleged research misconduct, should be brought to immediate attention of your designated contact point, your scientific mentor or supervisor. So if you see the research happening and it doesn't seem to be ethical, as a young scientist or a young researcher, same as an old one, you should talk to the person, the mentor or advisor, to ask them what do they think about this. And always try to deal with these issues internally first. It's not good because sometimes you'll find there's a misunderstanding involved. But sometimes people won't change, so you need a process of discussion. These might be investigated according to the policies and procedures of the body with primary responsibility, while respecting the laws and sovereignty of states of all participating parties and people. You cooperate in and support any such investigations, and to accept, subject to any appeal process, the conclusions of any such investigation and take appropriate action. So these are some recommendations. So what do you do when your friend has been accused of plagiarism in a paper and the journal has found it? What do you do? If you're a friend, what you do is talk to your friend about how we can help and did they learn, what did they learn. I had to write apology letters on behalf of some of my professor colleagues who are old professors in Japan. In fact, they've been heads of their, large academic societies, editorial boards of large journals, and they had copied, in this case, a dear professor who was dear to me, had copied 257 words from a paper published in the journal Science, and put it in his own paper. He'd changed 8 words in amongst that to try and hide it. He had published a paper with 10 co-authors, all junior researchers, and he was caught. So what should, as a friend, I wrote the letter to the journal Science, apologizing for his behavior, for him, I wrote the words for him, saying he took all responsibility on behalf of the other authors who were junior, also had a problem with this, and sorry about, etc. The letter was quite good because the journal Science did not embarrass him publicly. The other journal did write the editorial and explain about him because he had been the former president of the International Association of Human Biologists, and he had done this in their journal. So it was quite embarrassing for him. But hopefully he learned his lesson. That it was as a friend, you sometimes have to support, and hopefully this is part of the education. It also just went to show how widely plagiarism was happening. And nowadays, probably less. But you will find this. Have you had friends plagiarize things in publication? And people sometimes say plagiarize your work. I've had this come to me to review. It's a reviewer or a journal. The journal asks me, and then they send me somebody who plagiarized my work because it's quite similar to my work, and they think maybe they're good for reviewing it. So here you come, you've got a paper with some sections plagiarized, and recommendations going back saying you should put some quotations about where you got your work. There are cultural differences that are see. Another issue. The majority of biological samples are taken as part of clinical practice and diagnosis. Ask where the samples come from and write truthfully. Okay, I got the samples from the freezer. It's what you say in the paper. I got my samples from the freezer. They were existing in the laboratory. 2 months ago in our class, in our AUSN class, we looked at a report published by the President's Commission of Bioethics in the United States on ethics of sexually transmitted infectious disease research in Guatemala. Have any of you heard of this abuse? So in 1946 to 1948, many unethical experiments were done on STIs in Guatemala. The head of this research then later went to Tuskegee to continue the Tuskegee study. The Tuskegee study is infamous as well. Later, many years later, this researcher published some of the results that he included. He couldn't publish openly because it's unethical even in 1945. And that he published some things like, we have found the infection rate for men to get syphilis from sexual intercourse is 1 in 20. And his citation is unpublished data. The data is from their unethical research, which couldn't be published, but he could include it later as an unpublished observation. So the samples of some of these people that didn't give their blood voluntarily. And of course, famous cases, samples of prisoners during World War II. Some of the Holocaust victims, their medical samples were used in German universities for 50 years or so, until people realized that this is not really good. Skeleton collections. Skeleton collections used in German medical schools, do you know where they came from? They chose people to stand in the concentration camp from short to high, and as good samples, specimens. They were living at that time, and then they were killed and the skeleton was taken to medical school. Have you heard of Geronimo, the Apache Indian, Geronimo?
Yes.
Do you know where his skull is still? His skull is still in Harvard Medical School. They still refuse to return it to be buried. Apache, the famous Apache who did, can come to AUSN and go to the mountains where he evaded. We have but that's very interesting. Cranimetry. They used to go to study the shape of the skull. The Americans did the same thing with Native American Indians, line them up, live, not live long. We take them for our skull collection. Okay. They got money for his skull. They had to first take the head off up there, chop the head off, which was not good for the people who were alive. Yeah. So, scientific study, not good, in a sense. I'm not laughing, it's sort of ironic that people do these things in the name of science. So do think about where you got your samples, and you can't later say the samples were given voluntarily, consent was given for the blood from donors. In fact, even the syphilis studies, they said these people gave their consent. In fact, some of them, many of them didn't know anything. But they still published papers to say that. Genetic data, the next slide looks at genetic data associated with an identifiable person stored for processed for purposes of research or any other purpose must be held confidential in conditions set by law. So, keeping your commitment to keep confidentiality in terms of some epidemiological research may prevent certain types of future research. So finding the balance between progress of science, privacy protection, and the conditions under which people gave the samples for what, the motivation, like I gave it for research. How do you balance this? This is something which you have to look carefully at the ethics guidelines. It has changed over time. I think now in some countries people are more willing to take samples and keep the epidemiological data that we can code the privacy for a certain period of time. And you have to remember that when you're looking at the research papers published in that period, they were very strict. And they didn't keep the useful data. Tsuyoshi may know the Echo Child project in Japan. Echo Child, do you know? Okay, so I'll teach all of you the Echo Child, ecological child. It's a population database, 100,000 pairs of newborn baby collected first from fecal sample, mother and now father is added. Followed for the next 20 years of life, environment, genetics, all sorts of testing. And they caught it just before Fukushima. It just started, and after the Fukushima radioactive accident. So they then increased their sample of Fukushima because of the use of getting data on what's going to happen from radioactivity. But it's ongoing for several years now. Started about 5 years ago. And in fact, AUSN is doing the ethics on that. But it's very interesting that here you have a sample section. How do you deal with consent? You get this first samples from this person as a fetus. What happens when 18 years old and then can say, I don't agree to this study? It's a bit late. The data is already kind of coded and in the system. But I will imagine that the scientific advantages of this study will be they'll want to continue for more than 20 years. If you really have this cohort of 100,000 to follow from birth to death, with their consent, the parents give consent, and the children can give consent when they're 18, to find the source of many environmentally determined disease. So this is an interesting, the sort of issues of large population basis. Do you have a biobank, national biobank project in Mexico?
No, not yet.
Iceland, Kari Stevenson just published the Icelandic database. They have 40% of the total population's genetic markers published. That means basically for Iceland they can extrapolate the whole population. That's they have a small population, but 40% of the whole country. The Estonians also trying to do most of their country as well. So these interesting population studies. Papers need to preserve the confidentiality of persons. That they can do this in ways, for some of you, you're probably doing this with interviews. Some of the interviews, like attitudes about future when you're youth, is fine. What about when did I feel suicidal? We start these questions. This could be quite sensitive. Sharing the benefits, I talk briefly. So if we're going to share the benefits of our research, we need to publish. We should publish the results in a form that gives the results back to people and also help our collaborators who get in the sun via data. One thing at the bottom, benefits should not constitute improper inducements to participate in research. Okay, so if you're doing the survey or doing the sample, how much money can you pay to your participants to join in? None?
Just to cover expenses.
Travel expenses?
Overnight expenses or something.
Okay. So if I came to your lab to give you some blood, you would pay my travel expense?
Well,
maybe. You can put me up in the Sheraton overnight?
No. Just irregular.
How about a concert? Can you let me go to a pop concert too?
No.
Oh, I don't think I give you my blood. I'm going to go to another researcher. He's going to give me more.
Okay. Go there.
Okay. So the inducements to research are you need to find a balance. In some countries you can pay people, and often, let's say a pharmaceutical company is doing a survey. Okay, they can give you, some money for doing a survey. In Japan, for giving doing the haplotype map, we gave around $50 book coupon to each participant. And we didn't get into travel or other things. We just said, we will give you 5,000 yen, which is $50 book coupon, because most people in Japan like books. And so this was not giving cash, but giving a coupon for the book. And then there was a lot of discussion. Should we give any? Should we give, if people travel a long way, shouldn't we give them more? And so it can be complicated. But the regulation, the international declaration is don't give improper inducements. Now when you're writing, let's come back to writing. Whose perspective to write for? You write for researchers in your field? Or more generally? I want to write for educators. I want to write for surgeons. I want to write for biologists. Or I want to write for any academic researcher. I want to write for my participants. I'm writing a paper to report back the results of my study as part of my obligation to share the results of the research with people who join the study. A summary of the research. I write with the community. I might be targeting diabetes in indigenous populations and say, well, I want to write in the languages. I need somebody to publish a paper, and then this is translate and get this information understandable to people. I might write for students because it's a textbook. I might write for the donors so that they're going to get me more money, or at least I have an obligation in a grant to write the report back to the grant. So people, so would you like to make a comment, Scott, Darryl?
Yes, yeah. I would like to write for the masses of the world, and the title of my master's thesis is peace, conflict, and resolution, good versus evil. That's my thesis. Thank you.
Okay, so you write for the masses of the world on good and evil and peace. Okay? You want to read this? Yes, okay, they want to read it. So you have to write in Spanish, Arif. You heard the Spanish before.
Yes, Darryl, I'm about 40% done with my thesis work, and the other 60% is remaining. I have the ideas organized, and the concept of my thesis is firstly, I discuss the conflict between good and evil in the world at present times. And then I discuss the evils of politics in the world, and the governments that are governing the evil. And lastly, I discuss the coming of the Messiah, the holy Messiah, where all races of people in some way are looking for the Messiah. That's my end of the process, and then I come to the conclusion.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Okay, so it's good. So that's an example of a paper wanting to write a thesis, which would be for the general population. Okay, so we had donors, policymakers. If you want to write a recommendation for changing the law, you need to write to a policymaker. Policymakers often don't read regular journals, they read other types of journal, or they need a summary, a policy brief. Okay? You might want to write for many people, if it's possible, multiple view. You might want to write for the reviewer or editor. My first paper I published on bioethics was The Uncertainties of Painless Animals. It was questioning utilitarianism focusing on pain. I wrote it to the journal Bioethics because the editor was Peter Singer, who had focused on the importance of pain and sentience. So I thought this would be most interesting for me to write a paper for him as editor, challenging the views of reliance on pain only for animals. And it was interesting, an interesting discussion was published. And then, so in fact, that was in my mind. I thought, that's ideal. I write this sort of topic to, it also teaches me about the topic as I write. Some reviewers say you might do that. Of course, the subject may be interesting for people too. Some basics of integrity, is the same word in Spanish. No plagiarism, no fabrication, no falsification. Declare your conflict of interest. Science ethics, some infamous cases. First, let's look. In the United States, the Office of Research Integrity was founded in 1989 to reduce instances of scientific misconduct under the auspices of a public health service. A training document was released to help academic institutions train scientists in proper conduct with the aim of reducing cases of misconduct, fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. Graduate students working in science have been trained in scientific method, critical thinking, and analysis skills. How can these skills be harmonized with ethical thinking and decision making? In 2012, more than 400 cases of misconduct were reported which caused the Office of Research Integrity to suggest that teaching ethics and scientific training is not meeting expectations. Basically, they're saying, although we had a program to teach all graduate students not to do misconduct, we still have 400 cases a year of misconduct. A survey of several thousand scientists admitted to one or more forms of misconduct. Okay, so what did they do? 15% dropped data points. What this means is you get data points on a graph,
and you have outlying data, meaning you have a straight line and some point is outlying. There must have been something wrong with that test tube. I don't think I should include it. It's gone. Now my line is perfect. That's 15% did this.
It's outlier.
Well, it's incorrect. Incorrect. Dropping data points. It depends how many data points you drop. Okay? But basically, you could get some false conclusions because you want a straight line, but actually the real truth may be a curve. Because of that dropping a data point, we don't know the truth. Many years later, somebody's going to find 15%. 15% change the design or methodology or results in a study during the publication. Okay, so it means they didn't actually do what they said they did. I chose my survey topics randomly. Actually, I asked everybody who could do a questionnaire that I knew, and that was my random sample. Okay, you need to be clear when you do a survey. Who exactly is the sample? When I did my international bioethics survey, I did random houses in many countries, in different cities, and every second house. But I also, some houses don't have a litter box, so what do you do? Well, actually you have to modify and say every second litter box, not every second house. 10% admitted to inappropriately assigning authorship credit, which is rather low. Okay, so they gave a ghost author the paper. Well, let's say Dr. Rao, Dr. Masala have been working together for a long time. There's a paper of Bioethics in Monterey. Let's say Rao writes the paper. Out of courtesy, he may add Masala. Masala might do the same thing. They, in fact, didn't really write the paper. If we're writing about origins of the Institute of Investigation of Bioethics, maybe it's actually appropriate to include both. But they may not be actually writing the paper. Sometimes people are assigned authorship and they don't know about it. Oh, I'm an author on that paper? I didn't know that. I've sometimes seen that. Okay? It's quite surprising. Go and Google search to find a paper that your name is on, didn't know I was the name on that paper. It's good if it's good paper. It's a problem if it's plagiarized or if it's a bad paper. I was reading an interesting, listening to a podcast a few days ago. A very famous writer of pornography novels in the US from 1965 to around the year 2000. He wrote dozens and dozens of novels. In fact, I think it was more like 300 novels. He wrote under 15 different names. 15 names. He wrote, because at the beginning pornography is a very embarrassing thing to write about, that it was an emerging market after science fiction. So he wrote pornography, and he got income for his family. He was from countryside Kentucky, so a very closed religious community, and his wife was typing all the manuscripts. So his wife and him got the income for raising their children from writing pornography novels. He wrote under 15 different names. Sometimes he used a different name because this publisher here just signed a contract. But he needed more money, so he signed another contract with a different name to you. And he wrote, so interesting. In the past, many ladies writing had to write using a man's name. Yeah, because publishers didn't accept ladies writing. So this is using a pseudonym, false name. Professor Wan Woo Suk, Have you heard of him? This is a picture of him.
Korean researcher.
Korean researcher.
He plagiarized, and it is embarrassing, and his writing is retracted.
That's right. In fact, I'm about to publish a paper in my journal from a whistleblower, the actual person who worked in his lab, who exposed this man and had to go in hiding for a couple of years. Do you know Professor Wang? He's a famous Korean scientist. He published in the paper journal Science in 2005, claiming a cloning of human cells. He actually falsified the paper. Nobody could replicate what he did. He also had another problem. He got the eggs to get the nuclei for cloning the human cells, which he claimed he cloned, which yet he didn't. He got the eggs from his graduate students. Okay, graduate students. Marcel has we have a lot of graduate doctoral students here who are ladies in the group. Okay, let's do research on embryos. Please give me some oocytes and I'll give you an A. Okay? And to be part of a world-shattering research to clone. Actually, in the Korean research culture, these graduate students, also devoted to their professor, probably can't say no. They're happy to give it. But because they're happy, you really need to get some difference, some separation. You should not get graduate students eggs for your research. Firstly, getting eggs for making clones is a bit controversial. I don't know in Mexico if you can do it or not. But secondly, taking from your graduate students, they do hyperovulation. You get a lot of eggs, take out the eggs. Some of them were doing the research on their own eggs for the papers. He falsified. He was so famous, a postage stamp in Korea with his face, his name. He had a stamp was issued. They had to take away the stamp because he was caught. And he was actually convicted. Do you know what he does nowadays? He had to, of course, resign as professor of Seoul National University. You have dogs. You want to clone your dog? He is a leading company cloning cats and dogs in the world. Rich Americans will clone their cats and dogs for lots of money. He doesn't. So, clone cats and dogs. There you go. Cloning people, he didn't do so well, but he actually couldn't do it, but he said he could do it. But just as well he couldn't. And I'd say, just as well, he could not clone human beings. Because one could imagine what sorts of things he might be doing. In Wilmot, just months after the Korean scientist shooting star Won Woo-sak fell from grace after confessing that most of his research was actually fabricated, the international science community is shaken by another scandal involving one of his leading figures in cloning research. In Wilmot, the English researcher who started the current frenzy about cloning. Have you heard of N. Wilmot and Dolly?
Yes.
This is Dolly. Okay, well, who actually did the work? Professor Wilmot of Roslin Institute admitted this week that he only played a supporting role in Dolly's creation, and that most of the credit should instead go to his colleague Keith Campbell, who co-authored a paper about Dolly in the prestigious Nature magazine in 1997. So Wilmot actually wasn't the principal investigator. His colleague Keith Campbell should be. However, this is disputed by Prem Singh, another Roslin Institute researcher, who also accuses Wilmot and Campbell of bullying to downplay the role he played in Dolly's creation. the employment tribunal was investigating Singh's claims. So Singh said he actually did all the experiments. Okay? However, there are even more researchers who assert the importance of making a dolly. Bill Ritchie and Karen Newcock, lab technicians at Ross Institute, declare that they did all the decisive laboratory work during the experiment that Ivana should be best. So getting false credit and the accolades, and Wilmot got so many prizes. I've met both Professor Wan and Professor Wilmot and been on panels talking about their work. They actually didn't really become too ethical. Sometimes drug trials also have unethical things. Next slide. 6 men are in hospital intensive care, 2 of them in critical condition after participating in trials of a new drug intended to treat chronic inflammatory conditions in leukemia. Sometimes adverse reactions to drugs, companies may even hide the results, the adverse events. High-profile cases, and this is a public health case. The paper linking MMR vaccine with autism report was retracted. 10 of 13 authors later retracted the findings. The journal editor wrote, the MMR scare was based not on bad science, but on deliberate fraud. Such clear evidence of falsification of data should now close the door on establishing vaccine scare. Do you know MMR vaccine? And you've heard of its link to autism? The original paper? It's falsified. It's a falsified paper. Yet so many people, even today, don't get vaccination because of this falsified paper. It's had side effects. This is just one example. In fact, thousands of cases of measles occur in unvaccinated children. We had a case close to where I lived in Disneyland last year with the outbreak of measles. And it's shocking in America, United States. And in fact, we had this discussion with our friends from Bangladesh. The vaccination rates in Bangladesh are much better than in the United States. So, causes of misconduct. Frank discussions about stress in a profession with concrete examples. This is some of the reason that young scientists do misconduct. I need to publish a paper to get the doctorate. Okay. Do you need to publish a paper? I asked you and you said yes. I need to complete my thesis. I need to complete within time. There's a time limit of the university. There's a time limit of my sponsorship. How awareness can help deal with stress. So maybe having an objective perspective and being an honest and open dialogue partner will help. In order to get your postdoctoral funding, you need often to do published papers. So ORI, Office of Research Integrity, has guidelines for proper conduct defined through misconduct and different accords. And I think Professor Rao is going to start talking soon on these codes of conduct. By the way, in the PowerPoint you get later, we have stated regulations for our thesis. The thesis is an extended piece of writing that reflects an original thought or research conducted by a candidate. Our Master's in Bioethics and Global Public Health thesis length is expected to be between 20 to 50 pages. We actually say in words, 20,000 words, and publishable quality. Prospective graduates must defend their thesis in public at an open public gathering or forum. And so it should be original thought. We have a code of conduct that's several pages long. You have guidelines on thesis committees, thesis advisors, and so on. Finally, I'm going to look at a few slides on reviewers. Third way to view ethics is interactive ethics, discussion and debate between people, groups within society and communities, Such dialogue skills are necessary to live harmoniously with others. Publishing a paper, then enjoy the interaction with reviewers. It can improve your paper. Always ask the reviewers' comments and suggestions if you do not get it, and revise according to their suggestions. Sometimes they disagree. And reviewers can be quite different opinions. For the same paper, I've had reviews saying, this is a bad manuscript, it should never be published. This is the best paper I've read in years. For the same paper, from peer review. And then, fortunately, I had a couple of other reviews, I had 4 reviews. These are 2 of them. The other 2 were interesting and good paper. I suggest you change this point and this point and that point. Or please, maybe you add this reference. And those type of reviews are most useful because they're suggesting something concrete to do. If somebody just says, it's the best paper I've read, how do you improve it? You don't know it. But every paper can be improved. And then you have others who say, it's a horrible paper, it should not be published. What do you do? Give me some idea of what I should improve. Why is it horrible? So, review. Now, when you publish paper, you also will have to sign a copyright agreement. You may. So actually, somebody asked me where do I get my papers. I've signed copyright agreements with all these journals. I have all my papers on my website. You can download for nothing. It's against the law, but I think it's okay. So I don't think journals should, once you sign a copyright agreement, you can't send your paper to people. And I think papers should be open. But this is a big source of discussion. And some journals are very expensive to get reprints. And some journals need to get reprints in order to survive. So it's an ethical issue. Conflict of interest disclosure forms. You may have conflict of interest, but you just have to disclose what your conflicts are. Okay. We all have conflicts of interest. I don't know if you could read this. I want to show you an example, the next 4 slides. This is 4 slides of a review of a grant. In fact, it's a postdoctoral fellowship application in Europe that I review the ethics for an EU postdoc system. And I'm looking at the ethics side, but you can see here, I took out the candidate's name. Years of experience, had 8 years. This is for a postdoc fellowship. That's agreeing skills. It's a very good postdoc scholarship. If any of you want to do a postdoc, they pay very well. Name of the reviewer for the science review. These 3 reviewers, the names here. Their ID. The fellow's record. So they review several aspects. The record of the fellow. This is a reviewer 1040. Said the candidate has a strong experience in animal physiology, avian embryology, and cell biology. Reviewer 10, well, this one here, the reviewer says, the applicant has published 35 articles, 11 of them first authors. Actually, if you read this, you wonder why this person is still a postdoc. They should be a professor. But anyway, that's why obviously this is a very good candidate for a fellowship application. The fellowships in Europe, for example, now many young scientists have a challenge to get a permanent job, so they go around with the postdocs. So fellow's record was examined. Research project proposal, they give their score. science, impact, methodological excellence, competencies and knowledge, expected added value, yes or no, ethics, if it's an ethical issue, if it's okay. Impact here. So science, I assume was out of 10, and they were judged by all 3 reviewers as clearly excellent science. Methodology of excellence got 2 9s. This looks like impact. Impact may well be out of 5. Okay. The comments. So that's how they review this grant. Hosting environment for a postdoc. So postdoc, you apply the researcher, and then the host institution is going to host you. They also have to send something. Is it a good institute to, because this postdoc scheme is giving money to institutions to host promising researchers from around the world. And they say, is it going to be good for scientific mentoring, access to resources, training or learning, material conditions? So again, it seems reasonable. The training or learning, it's probably 8 out of 10, sort of a slightly less, but they thought scientific mentoring is going to be good. Conclusions and general comments, total evaluation out of 100. Okay. And so, actually, these 3 independent reviewers, this reviewer clearly was more favorable, 96, but that's why we have 3, because these 2 are very similar. So the review system had some scores, comments, and then people can assess, and then they send to the ethics committee to look at as well. So that's an example of a review process. You look and you have a scoring system. For writing papers may be different to that. Okay, you can find more information on the websites there, and I'll be talking on a different subject tomorrow. And you can find some papers here, but as I said, I can give you the papers during the workshop. Do you have any general questions before we change to our next presenters? Any questions?
Most of the programs is basically euthanasia, and all of this. But I think the more important things are conflict, interest, personal, different things in some institute to other in the same area. Understand?
Yes. Yes, so many papers on bioethics, we talk often about euthanasia or surrogacy or some topics, but in fact ethical issues to resolve, conflict of interest is an important issue, often neglected. So some of these, I guess if you feel the issue is important, then you can write about it. Some journals are very happy to write about these subjects. In fact, many will find neglected subjects could be good for their readership. So I think if you think an area is neglected, you don't find many papers, it's good to write a paper. If you're going to write a paper on euthanasia, you need to say something very original or a descriptive study from a different subject group. A general discussion of the pros and cons of euthanasia is not going to get published in a mainstream journal. You have to say something new. But a general discussion of some new topic might be published because it's not common.
We were talking also about the different cultures, and I think that is also the same issue. Different cultures, I mean, for example, the Occidental and Oriental culture, that are completely different. The way to think, the way to do something. I mean, for example, we study in the Occidental culture, we study because we want to have a break maybe, and in the Oriental culture, you study because you want to eat. And the bottom line, I mean, the question is, how do you see the differences of cultures in the papers? Because you have your own culture and you have the target public also. You want to have a lot of people who read that paper.
Yeah, so you have to think then of the audience, I guess. One thing is the audience. Who, if it's a paper that's going to be read by people in some community, you think about what's most useful for that community. If it's from another group where you're trying to open up to a new area, to broaden it, should you take a view that I always think, because I'm interested in cross-cultural ethics, that I want to find something new. That let's say I'm trying to find the practical guidelines for teachers in Mexico about teaching bioethics. Well, they want something practical on how to teach. They may be interested peripherally on some case study, which could be from anywhere. But they're going to also want to relate it to, let's say, for the students to find it interesting. Students are probably most interested in something from their culture, with maybe one simple comparison. That they may not be interested from their different culture. They need to be relevant to their own learning. So if my audience was for teachers and the teachers are going to use it for students, then you have to think about how people are going to use your paper, not just how it's going to be used. And I find some papers are very useful for teaching, even though so for example, teaching in this course, we teach on review. We used some interesting resources on bioethics, some textbooks I've written, which I give to you, and some others have written, some anthologies which are publicly available. And they were quite useful as review chapters. So there's one which we used called the Cambridge Textbook of Bioethics, which is written by mainly Canadians. They were papers published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal over many years and put together. And so it includes many Canadian examples, but it's 60 or 70 chapters on different topics of bioethics. Very interesting. And it's freely accessible, so that's another advantage when you think about the use. If it's available for free, in good language to read, then that's great. If your paper is going to be published in some obscure journal you have to pay for, even though it may have a high ranking, people may not read it. I didn't talk about citation index maybe before, but it's another thing which is very, I think there's a lot of debate on it, because some papers which if you cite it a lot, it may be useful, but if you're actually on the internet, if your function is to be educating, your readers may not be publishing papers, they may just be reading it and using it for teaching. Then that might be your main measure of success.
Yeah, the other thing is, coming back to the first question, is what do you want to hear? What do you want to learn? And what do you want to teach? And perhaps in bioethics, that's one of the main problems, well, maybe elsewhere, but here in Mexico, we want to talk about that. Euthanasia, assisted reproduction, all that. And that's not only bioethics. That's bioethics is a lot more than that. So I think that the main problem is what do you want to teach if you're a teacher in bioethics? What do you want to learn if you're a student in bioethics? And perhaps that's probably the main point that here in Mexico we are still in the process of what is bioethics and what are the orientations that you can put in bioethics. So if you stay with beginning of life or end of life issues, well, you're going to stop there, and that's not only bioethics. That's bioethics is a lot more than that. So I understand what you say about what do you want to cover, how do you want to orient here in Mexico opposed to what is Europe or United States or Asia. And I understand that because depending on the country you need more emphasis in some areas. But really the main problem is how do you orient bioethics as an education? And maybe that's part of our shortness of understanding in bioethics.
I see, yeah. Yeah, and I think you need to be contextually significant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
So for example, in March I went to Chile, they invited me and they asked me to do an interview with a journalist, and the interview was on abortion. And then I thought it's an old issue. And I asked, what's the issue of abortion? And in fact, they asked me like 12 or 15 detailed questions. It was published in the newspaper, and they said it was quite useful. But I learned, about the abortion law before. The law in Chile, you may know even if you are raped, you cannot have an abortion. And I gave my opinions about this. And because of love of life and my sort of pragmatism, maybe I have a different angle to just a straight out rejection of their law, which I do reject. And I said I couldn't understand judges, condoning such a thing. And right now they're doing a political discussion, but later we learn the context that actually some of the people are trying to move for a general liberation of the law, and some people are just going to try and do step by step to get it a bit easier now and later. So this sort of ongoing hot discussion. So it's very relevant for a woman in Chile right now. But in many countries that discussion is really old and I think we've exhausted it. But it's become very relevant for policy on choosing the limits that states have to decide. Is next one wrong?
Ok, yo voy a hablar español porque me sale mejor. Doctor, me parece muy interesante. Creo que el problema quizás radica en base a este cuestionamiento a que la bioética de manera particular se está volviendo una bioética de carácter práctico en el uso de las ciencias biomédicas, me parece a mí, de acuerdo a lo que hemos estado viendo. Y me parece que lo que ha pasado es que no se está yendo hacia la construcción de propiamente el ser humano, esto es la transferencia hacia las ciencias sociales, y donde la bioética carece totalmente de una presencia en el contexto de las ciencias sociales, que es la construcción propiamente del ser humano, mientras que la bioética se está constituyendo en un aspecto totalmente práctico, es decir, hacia la actividad de una situación de resolución como es la práctica de la investigación, y no se está transfiriendo hacia la práctica de la construcción del ser humano. Y ese me parece que es el gran diferencial. Cuando vemos países como el nuestro, hay un avance por ejemplo, de los 70s, 80s sobre el contexto de la bioética dentro de las ciencias de la salud. Sin embargo, vemos un rezago totalmente carente dentro de las ciencias sociales. Entonces, ¿qué es donde nos construimos como seres humanos? En las ciencias sociales, no en el contexto de la práctica clínica médica. Y ahí me parece que ha faltado unir esos conceptos. Entonces, parecemos que vamos caminando por situaciones paralelas que nunca van a confluir mientras no transfiramos los conceptos de bioética al contexto de formación en ciencias sociales. Y ese me parece que es un contexto muy importante, porque al final, vuelvo a reiterar, me parece a mí que es el complejo de la problemática que padecemos muchos países, quizás en Latinoamérica particularmente. Eso es lo que... Y lo digo mejor en español para expresarlo por ustedes.
In brief,
sí, de manera breve.
He's talking about the ongoing importance of bioethics in the world, universally. But that really, and perhaps here in Mexico, we have just orient bioethics in a clinical, medical sort of point of view, with this sparkling of main problems we want to solve individually. And he mentioned that the thing that bioethics lacks here, as we can understand, is the connection with the social, the social studies, the social science, the structure of man and the behavior of man regarding the social aspect of bioethics, not the individual trying to solve a pinpoint problem. That's the idea. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think tomorrow when we talk about vulnerability, it will be also some of these aspects. By the way, this is a journal, if you're interested in reading this is the journal I edited. It's now in the 25th year. So for 25 years been publishing this journal. All the papers are online, the Bias Journal. Mexico has 2 links I can see. You can search using a find command simply. Euthanasia has 18 matches. So you can go through using this and then you can link to the article and then find it. So a lot of papers, there's about 1,000 papers published. So it's trying to, paper writing was fundamental for developing an area. I was developing Asian bioethics. So having a journal of Asian International Bioethics was useful as an alternative to some of the Western journals. Many Western journals, you should know, have a bias towards English journals. 80% of citations of most papers in European or English or American papers are from English or American authors. Already have a bias. So this is there's a lot of papers you need to explore. So please write papers. Don't be afraid of writing papers. Just write paper every day. You can publish it. Are we going to Professor Rao now or myself? Okay. Would you like to come? Should I go now? Yes, please. So Professor Rao is going to talk. Okay. So Professor Rao is going to come and sit in front.